Most people know Psalm 23. They know its sound, they know its softness. They know the comfort it brings when life feels fragile. They have heard it at funerals, in sermons, in hospital rooms, in whispered prayers, late at night when fear was too loud and sleep would not come. They know the words, they know the rhythm, they know how it feels to let it pass over the heart like something sacred and familiar. But knowing the words is not the same as entering the life they describe. And that is where many people miss the power of this psalm. Because Psalm 23 is not just a chapter you quote when life hurts. It is not just poetry for sad days. It is not just a soft spiritual blanket meant to calm you down when everything feels heavy. Psalm 23 is a blueprint. It is a kingdom pattern. It is a picture of what life looks like when God is not merely present in your story, but leading it. And the difference between those two things is massive. Many believers want God close, but not fully in charge. They want His comfort, but they still want control. They want His provision, but they still want to manage their own outcomes. They want His peace, but they do not want to surrender the right to lead themselves. They want the green pastures, the still waters, the restored soul, the table, the overflowing cup, the goodness and mercy, but they do not always want the first line of the psalm to become the governing truth of their life. And without that first line, the rest of the psalm becomes something admired rather than inhabited, because the whole psalm stands on one foundation. The Lord is my shepherd. That is not a decorative line. That is not a gentle religious phrase. That is the key that unlocks everything else. If the Lord is truly your shepherd, then fear loses some of its authority. If the Lord is truly your shepherd, then lack cannot define you the same way. If the Lord is truly your shepherd, then the valley changes meaning. The enemy changes meaning. The future changes meaning. Even suffering changes meaning, not because those things disappear, but because they are no longer the central power in your life. The shepherd is. David understood that. And David did not write this psalm as a man living in fantasy. He did not write it from a place of untouched comfort. He did not write it as someone who had only known calm days and easy roads. David had known danger. He had known betrayal. He had known caves, tears, battles, waiting, pressure, guilt, grief, and the crushing uncertainty of not knowing how God would fulfill what God had promised. He had been hunted, he had been tested, he had been shaken. But through all of that, he learned something that many believers still have not learned. The secret of peace is not found in controlling your circumstances. The secret of peace is found in who leads you through them. That is what Psalm 23 reveals. It does not promise a painless life. It does not promise a life without shadows. It does not promise that if God is with you, you will never walk through dark places, never face enemies, never feel weak, never hate, never tremble. No, this psalm is deeper than that. It shows you that the greatest security in life is not found in having an easy road. It is found in having a faithful shepherd. And when that truth moves from your mouth into your soul, your life begins to change. Because then you stop asking only, how do I escape this? And you start asking, who is leading me through this? You stop measuring peace by the absence of pressure. You start measuring peace by the presence of God. You stop treating faith like a tool to get your preferred outcome. You start seeing faith as the posture of a sheep who trusts the shepherd's voice more than the terrain. That is why this psalm is so dangerous to fear. It dismantles the idea that peace only comes after everything around you has settled down. It teaches something far deeper. It teaches that peace begins when authority shifts. When the Lord becomes your shepherd, you do not have to know every turn in the path in order to keep walking. You do not have to understand every delay in order to remain secure. You do not have to see the whole future in order to trust the next step. Sheep do not survive by mastering the map. They survive by following the shepherd. And that brings us back to the opening line. The Lord is my shepherd. Notice how personal that is. David does not say, "The Lord is a shepherd." He does not say, "The Lord can sometimes help." He does, "Lord gives decent advice." He says, "The Lord is my shepherd." That is language of relationship, language of surrender, language of belonging. It means David is no longer picturing himself as someone trying to build his own safety, while occasionally asking heaven for assistance. He is saying, "My life is under the leadership of another." That is the first secret of Psalm 23, ownership, not God belonging to me in some sentimental sense, but me belonging under his care, his authority, his direction, his watchfulness, his wisdom. A shepherd does not merely appear when the sheep are panicking. A shepherd leads all the time. A shepherd sees ahead. A shepherd knows the danger before the sheep do. A shepherd is responsible for paths, protection, provision, and preservation. So when David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he is saying something far more radical than many people realize. He is saying, "I am not self-led anymore," and that is where most inner turmoil begins to break. Because a self-led life is a heavy life. A self-led life makes everything feel like your responsibility. Every closed door becomes terrifying. Every delay becomes personal. Every valley becomes proof that you made the wrong turn. Every attack becomes evidence that you are exposed. Every unanswered question becomes a weight you feel forced to solve on your own. That is what happens when you try to be both sheep and shepherd at the same time. You end up exhausted. Some of you are not tired because life is unusually difficult. Some of you are tired because you are trying to lead yourself through things only the shepherd was meant to carry. You are trying to predict outcomes you were never meant to predict. You are trying to control timing you were never meant to control. You are trying to force doors, manage perception, secure your own future, hold your own soul together, and then asking why peace feels so far away. It feels far away because peace is the fruit of shepherding, not self-rule. That is why Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." He did not say they always understand me first. He did not say they never tremble. He did not say they can explain everything I do. He said they hear, they are known, and they follow. That is the rhythm of a shepherded life. Not constant explanation, not total emotional ease, following. And once David declares that the Lord is his shepherd, the next sentence becomes possible. "I shall not want." That line has enormous depth. David is not saying he will never experience need in any visible sense. David had known hunger, pursuit, uncertainty, and instability. He knew what it was to live through seasons that made no natural sense. So when he says, "I shall not want," he is not speaking like a man who has never suffered. He is speaking like a man who has discovered that the shepherd is enough to keep lack from ruling the soul. That is a very different thing because many people have needs, but not everyone lives under the spirit of lack. And the spirit of lack is deeper than money. It is deeper than numbers. It is the inner panic that says I am not safe unless I can secure more. It is the constant ache that says what I have is not enough. Where I am is not enough. Who I am is not enough. And what is ahead does not look secure enough. Lack is not just material. It is emotional, mental, spiritual, and relational. Some people have full bank accounts and empty souls. Some have opportunities but no peace. Some have relationships but no rest. Some have success but still wake up afraid. Why? Because provision is not just about possessions. It is about trust. A sheep does not stand in the field calculating tomorrow's grass supply. The sheep follows the shepherd. The shepherd knows where provision is. The shepherd knows what the sheep need. The shepherd knows how to lead them there. And David is saying, once I understood who was leading me, I stopped letting visible scarcity define the condition of my soul. That is a powerful shift, because worry often reveals that we are still trying to be our own shepherd. We say we trust God, but the moment numbers look small, timing feels strange, plans change, or doors close, fear begins talking like it has legal authority over our thoughts. But Psalm 23 cuts through that fear and says, if the Lord is your shepherd, then your future is not at the mercy of your own ability to hold everything together. That does not mean you become careless. It means you stop living like an orphan. The shepherd changes the emotional logic of your life. Then David says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. That is one of the most beautiful and exposing lines in the whole psalm. Because sheep do not lie down when they are full of fear. They do not lie down when they feel threatened. They do not lie down when something is tormenting them internally. They lie down when they feel safe. So when David says the shepherd makes him lie down, he is showing us that God is not only concerned with moving us forward, he is concerned with settling us, and some of you need that more than another open door. You need your soul settled. You need God to quiet the inner storm. You need him to slow down the spinning mind, the constant striving, the quiet panic, the pressure that makes you feel like if you stop moving, everything will collapse. We live in a world that praises exhaustion. Busy looks important. Overworked looks admirable. Burned out looks committed. People wear restlessness like a badge of honor. But heaven does not glorify anxiety-driven striving. Heaven honors trust. Rest is not weakness. Rest is surrender made visible. When God makes you lie down, he is not trying to reduce your impact. He is trying to preserve your soul, because a restless spirit cannot hear clearly. A mind constantly racing cannot discern gently. A heart always in survival mode struggles to receive the quiet guidance of God. Some of your deepest spiritual breakthroughs will not happen while you are rushing. They will happen when the shepherd settles you enough to hear again. That is why the green pastures matter. They are not merely about having enough to eat. They are about a condition of security. The shepherd does not just give food. He creates safety. He does not only provide resources, he restores calm. He does not only move the sheep away from, he establishes an atmosphere where they can finally breathe. Then David says, he leads me beside still waters. Still waters are not just pretty imagery, they are spiritual language. Still waters represent calmness, steadiness, peace, a place where the soul is no longer thrashing around inside itself. A place where the noise becomes quiet enough for trust to live again. So many believers are spiritually dehydrated not because God has withheld himself, but because they have stayed too long in noisy places. Noisy thoughts, noisy fear, noisy comparisons, noisy striving, noisy emotional turbulence, and a noisy soul struggles to drink deeply from God. The shepherd does not lead with chaos, he leads into peace. That does not mean the whole world becomes still. It means the soul begins to learn where its waters are. The stillness of God becomes more powerful than the noise of life. And that leads directly into one of the deepest lines in the psalm. He restores my soul, not my image, not my schedule, not only my mood, my soul. That means God is working deeper than surface comfort. The soul is where hidden pain lives. It is where grief settles. It is where betrayal lingers. It is where fear leaves residue. It is where shame hides quietly. It is where shame hides quietly. It is where disappointment shapes are too long. A person can look composed on the outside and still have a deeply wounded soul on the inside. People can smile in public and bleed in private. They can function and still be fractured. They can keep going and still be carrying damage that has never really been healed. But the shepherd is not content to let you merely function. He restores. That means he takes what has been worn down and renews it. He takes what has been bruised and strengthens it. He takes what has been distorted by pain and realigns it. He takes what has been living under heaviness and begins breathing life back into it again. Restoration is not distraction. It is not emotional numbing. It is not pretending the wound never happened. Restoration is deeper. It is God entering the damaged place and making it whole in a way only He can. David knew what that meant. He knew what it meant to fail, to grieve, to carry the weight of his own weakness, to suffer under pressure, to feel broken in places nobody else could fully see. But he also knew that the shepherd was not only for guidance. The shepherd was for healing. That is why Psalm 23 carries such depth. It is not the language of someone avoiding pain. It is the language of someone who met God in pain and discovered that pain did not have the last word. Some of you do not just need encouragement. You need restoration. You need God to work beneath the surface, beneath the productivity, beneath the spiritual language, beneath the way you have learned to cope. You need the shepherd to touch what the world cannot see. That is not weakness. That is exactly what sheep are meant for. Sheep are not self-healers. They live by dependence, and the more deeply wounded the soul is, the more urgently it needs the shepherd. Then David says, He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. That means God's guidance is not random, and it is not shallow. He leads in paths of righteousness, right paths, clean paths, aligned paths, paths consistent with His nature, His wisdom, and His purposes. Not just paths that feel exciting, not just paths that flatter your desires, not just paths that look efficient or impressive, right paths, and He does it for His name's sake. That matters because the shepherd's leadership is tied to his character. He does not lead carelessly because His name is holy. He does not bring His sheep into confusion and abandon them. He does not mislead, manipulate, or wander. He leads in a way that reflects who He is. That means, even when you do not understand the path, you can trust the shepherd's name. That becomes especially important in the next line. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. This is where the psalm becomes even more powerful, because David destroys the fantasy that being led by God means being exempt from valleys. No, the shepherd-led life still goes through valleys. It still walks through dark stretches. It still encounters uncertainty, sorrow, fear, loss, and seasons where everything feels heavier than usual. But here is the difference. The valley is no longer proof of abandonment that changes everything. Some people assume that if life gets dark, something has gone wrong. If the pressure rises, if grief comes, if fear knocks, if the future feels shadowed, they assume God must have stepped back. But Psalm 23 says no. The presence of the valley does not cancel the presence of the shepherd. In fact, sometimes the valley becomes the place where his presence becomes personal. Notice how David's language changes here. Earlier he said, "He leads me, he restores me, he guides me," but in the valley it becomes, "You are with me." Pressure brought him closer. The valley did not destroy intimacy. It deepened it. That happens in real life too. There are seasons where God is a dock. Valleys expose what is real. Valleys strip away shallowness. Valleys reveal whether your faith is built on comfort or on the character of God. Valleys can wound, yes, but they can also purify. They can take your theology out of abstraction and bring it into breath-level dependence. And David says, "I will fear no evil," not because evil is imaginary, not because the valley is harmless, not because he suddenly feels emotionally untouched, but because you are with me. The presence of God is stronger than the threat of the valley. That is the secret. The valley changes meaning when presence becomes greater than fear. Then David says, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." That is an incredible statement, because the comfort here is not soft sentiment. It is divine protection and divine correction. The rod was for defense. The staff was for guidance. One fought what threatened the sheep. The other directed the sheep when they drifted. Together they reveal a powerful truth. God's comfort is not only that he is near. It is that he is actively protecting and actively guiding, even when the sheep do not fully understand what he is doing. Some of God's no's were mercy. Some of his interruptions were mercy. Some of his redirections were mercy. Some of your disappointments were not signs of divine neglect. They were the shepherd's rod and staff at work. Closed doors, delayed answers, broken plans, painful detours, uncomfortable correction. All of those things can become part of how the shepherd preserves the life of the sheep. Because sheep do not always know what is safe, and that is why correction is comforting when you understand who is holding the staff. Then David says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." That line is stunning. Not after the enemies disappear, not after the opposition is gone in their presence. That means the shepherd's victory is not always expressed through removal. Sometimes it is expressed through peace in the middle of pressure. God does not need to erase all opposition before he can nourish you, honor you, and establish you. He can do it while the enemies are still watching. A table is not a battlefield image. It is a peace image, a provision image. A God sets that table in the very place where fear expected you to collapse. That means pressure does not have final authority over the climate of your soul. The enemy does not decide whether God can feed you. Opposition does not decide whether God can honor you. The shepherd is able to prepare peace right in front of the threat. That is real victory. not escaping every hard thing, but remaining nourished in the middle of what should have broken you. Then David says, "You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over." That is abundance language, not necessarily worldly excess, but divine overflow. The shepherd does not lead with stingy care. He is not giving bare minimum survival grace. He anoints, he overflows. He gives more than momentary maintenance. He gives sustaining mercy, renewing strength. Deep sustaining mercy, renewing strength, deep peace, and overflowing care. An overflowing cup means the shepherd's care exceeds the valley's ability to drain you. It means there is more grace in God than there is pressure in your circumstance, more mercy than your shame, more peace than your fear, more faithfulness than the uncertainty ahead. The cup overflows not because life is simple, but because the shepherd is generous. And then David closes with one of the most beautiful lines in all of Scripture. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." Not just on the good days, not only when you feel strong, not when your emotions are steady, all the days. That means you are not walking into tomorrow alone. You are not walking into the future uncovered. You are not walking into the unknown with only your own strength. Goodness and mercy are following you, God's kindness. That is the final secret. Psalm 23 does not end with mere survival. It ends with belonging, not visiting, dwelling, not just occasional divine rescue, ongoing nearness, not just help, home. That means the goal of the shepherd is not merely to get you through hard moments. The goal of the shepherd is to bring you into abiding intimacy, lasting security, and eternal belonging in his presence. The psalm begins with surrender and ends with home. It begins with shepherding and ends with dwelling. It begins with need and ends with nearness. That is why this psalm can change your life forever. Because it reveals that the deepest issue in your life is not first the valley, the enemy, the fear, the pressure, the uncertainty, or the lack. The deepest issue is this: who is leading you? If the Lord is your shepherd, then fear does not get the final say. If the Lord is your shepherd, lack does not become your identity. If the Lord is your shepherd, rest is not irresponsible. If the Lord is your shepherd, your soul can be restored. If the Lord is your shepherd, valleys do not prove abandonment. If the Lord is your shepherd, correction becomes comfort. If the Lord is your shepherd, enemies cannot cancel peace. If the Lord is your shepherd, goodness and mercy are already in motion. If the Lord is your shepherd, your life is not random. It is led, so do not reduce Psalm 23 to something you only visit when life hurts. Enter it, live it, let it confront the places where you still want comfort without surrender, peace without trust, blessing without obedience, and guidance without yielding control. Let it bring you back to the first line, back to the foundation, back to the central question: is the Lord really your shepherd? Not just your helper, not just your emergency contact, not just your source of inspiration, your shepherd. Because when that becomes true, everything changes. Not because life becomes easy, but because the shepherd becomes central. And when the shepherd is central, the sheep can finally have peace. If you are tired, he offers rest. If you are wounded, he offers restoration. If you are afraid, he offers presence. If you are lost, he offers guidance. If you are in the valley, he offers... If you are in the valley, he offers himself. If you are surrounded, he offers a table. And if you have been trying to lead yourself for too long, Psalm 23 is inviting you to let go. Let go of control. Let go of fear. Let go of the exhausting burden of trying to be both sheep and shepherd. And come back under the voice of the one who knows the path, knows the valley, knows the enemy, knows the past, knows the future, knows your soul, and still says, "Follow me." Because the real secret of Psalm 23 is not that David found a chapter that made him feel better. It is that David found a shepherd he could trust with his life. And that changes everything. If this message reached your heart, write in the comments, "The Lord is my shepherd.